Within a span of just 7 short months, a former director of the FBI was federally indicted, twice. Looking at this official court document from September 2025, we see the first set of charges: false statements and obstruction of a congressional proceeding. A few months later, in April 2026, a second indictment charged him with threatening the life of the president. On paper, this looks like the straightforward prosecution of James Comey, a disgraced law enforcement officer facing the consequences of his actions. But court records reveal a different reality. Federal judges ultimately had to dismantle these cases. We have to examine the Department of Justice itself and watch how its own internal safeguards were systematically bypassed. The origins of this conflict trace back to 2018, when Comey testified before Congress about executive attempts to shut down the FBI's investigation into former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. By September 2025, that historical tension escalated into public demands. Donald Trump began explicitly calling for immediate retribution against his political targets, posting online that justice must be served now. Faced with a direct mandate from the executive branch, officials inside the DOJ scramble to secure an indictment. To move that quickly, they circumvented their own standard operating procedures. The first major failure involved federal appointment law. Normally, if a U.S. attorney position is vacant and an administration's 120-day interim appointment expires, the law requires the local federal district judges to appoint the next intern prosecutor. The administration ignored that rule. Instead, they installed Lindsey Halligan, a former White House aide with zero prosecutorial experience, just days before she pushed the Comey indictment forward. Because the district judges never authorized her appointment, her signature on this document carried absolutely no legal weight. The very first step of this prosecution was a direct violation of federal appointment statutes. The person bringing the charges had no legal authority to do so. The DOJ's next procedural hurdle was the grand jury. A panel of citizens convened to review evidence and ensure a prosecution is actually justified before an indictment is handed down. During a November hearing, prosecutors admitted in court that the full grand jury never actually saw the final September indictment against Comey. Out of the required pool of 23 citizens, only the foreperson and one other juror were shown the actual charges they were voting on. A magistrate judge flagged this as a profound investigative misstep, noting that it severely tainted the integrity of the process and raised serious questions about prosecutorial misconduct. As a result of these compounding errors, a federal judge threw the entire case out in November 2025, officially ruling that Halligan lacked the authority to present the indictment in the first place. But the political demands for a conviction continued. Facing a collapsed case, a new set of federal prosecutors pivoted in April 2026, securing a second indictment over an Instagram picture of a seashell labeled 8647. To elevate a social media post into a federal threat charge, prosecutors relied on a public post from Donald Trump's own Truth Social account, which argued that 86 is a mob term, equating to an assassination threat against the 47th president. When standard procedural law blocked their initial efforts, the Justice Department resorted to legally dubious, fringe theories to keep the prosecution alive. When the federal judge dismissed that initial 2025 case, she did so without prejudice. In the legal world, that term normally means prosecutors get a second chance to refile the charges if they can fix their procedural errors. But there was a fatal catch for the Justice Department. By the time the case was dismissed, the statute of limitations for those original alleged crimes had already expired. Usually, a valid indictment pauses that statutory clock. However, legal precedent dictates that an unlawfully filed indictment does not. The clock kept ticking, and the government ran out of time. The justice system's structural safeguards, strict appointment rules, independent prosecutors, and grand jury oversight do not exist to protect criminals. They exist to prevent the machinery of the state from being used as a tool for political retribution. When political pressure forces the system to bypass its own rules, the prosecution itself becomes unlawful. The rule of law only holds its shape if the people inside the system actually enforce its procedures.